All right, party peoples of the interwebs, just a quick update because I'm getting ready to do an episode of The Unusual Suspects, and it's going to be a great one. I'm talking about what appears to be a Maidan-esque coup in Romania, staged by the usual players. Anthony Blinken's name is coming up. Stay tuned for that. But the news of the day, Alex Jones has a big fat W, and I don't mind putting this on blast so that I can put on blast the accuracy of my own predictions. This is in the bankruptcy of the Infowars case in the context of that lawfare, Sandy Hook families suing Alex Jones, Infowars, etc. for intentional infliction of emotional distress, defamation, where they lawfared their way into a $1.5 billion judgment. There were bankruptcy proceedings going on, restructuring so as to potentially come to a settlement, which would have yielded the judgment creditors exponentially more than what was offered by way of purchasing the assets of Infowars out of bankruptcy by The Onion and the backers of The Onion's offer, which happened to be the Connecticut plaintiffs in the lawsuit. I'm not going to go over all of that. If you don't know it, go back and read some articles or check some of my earlier videos. In the context of the bankruptcy, which went from a restructuring to a liquidation, they were having an auction for the assets of Infowars, and the auction was supposed to be a public auction. There were people who showed a legitimate interest in buying the assets of Infowars that were not necessarily leftist leaning. There was Roger Stone putting together a consortium to buy the assets. And what was supposed to be a public, transparent auction that had certain rules and regulations for the offer in order to be legitimate, couldn't be conditional, couldn't be based on a formula, had to be a cash offer, had to be public, so that people could know which offer was deemed the winning offer by the trustee. Well, in the context of that offer bid process, it was by way of the trustee suddenly transformed into a non-transparent, non-public auction submitted by envelopes where the deemed winning bid was actually not the highest bid. The highest bid was put out by, say, conservative-ish entity, FAUC. I forget what it stands for. Doesn't matter for the purposes here, because the deemed winning bid, which was not the most winningest bid, it wasn't the most money bid, was from The Onion, backed by the Connecticut plaintiffs in order to make that offer more money than it was actually money on the table. It was like $1.75 million for the assets. The Connecticut creditors basically said, we will forego what The Onion will have to pay us with the assets of Infowars in order to make that $1.75 million judgment the equivalent of a $7 million judgment. Okay. Chicanery through and through, done by way of not public offer, and the trustee deemed that lesser offer to be the winning offer. Okay, fine. Alex Jones, Infowars, started planning for, who's parking behind me? Started planning for potentially having their assets unlawfully usurped by The Onion, who was already taking the rounds, the victory lap on social media. Alex Jones started AJN, I think it was the Alex Jones Network, started broadcasting off the Infowars platform because they didn't just buy these assets through this deceitful, fraudulent, arguably, allegedly, bidding process. They then cut basically the feed to Infowars. They basically went in and said, now you get to cut down the Infowars broadcasting ability because we bought their assets out of bankruptcy through this fraudulent scheme, which we'll get into. Okay, Alex Jones, vocally contesting this, took it back to the trustee. His name is Lopez, not the trustee, the judge, Lopez. The trustee is named Murray, and said, this is fraud, overt fraud, that the winning offer, other than not being the most winningest offer, was also conditional, using formulas not actually based on a cash offer. And that it was fraudulent scheming between the lawyers for the judgment creditors, some of the judgment creditors who were incidentally acting to the detriment of the interest of the other judgment creditors, that being the Texas creditors, although the Connecticut creditors were saying, well, we own the bulk of this claim, so we get to basically, make this offer worth more to you, Texas creditors, than what it's actually worth, than what was actually refused by way of settlement offer in the restructuring. Okay, set that aside. Jones takes it back to Judge Lopez and says, this broke all of the rules. And Judge Lopez initially said, it kind of looks like it broke the rules. In the meantime, Alex Jones came out with an emergency injunction to declare the offer null and void and to disqualify The Onion and all of its backers from any future bids on the assets because of fraud. They were asking for sanctions, etc., which the judge didn't give, but we'll get there in a second. In the meantime, as well, Elon Musk intervenes and says, you can't transfer the Infowars X accounts because Infowars doesn't own those to transfer. And in order for it to be transferred, it requires X's approval because that's the rules of the TOS of X. And so Elon Musk intervened and said, no, this transaction can't go through. That is to say, the transfer of the X account and Alex Jones's personal account, because they don't own them. X does. And we would have to approve it, and we're not approving it. Okay, we don't have an answer on that intervention just yet. We don't have an answer on the emergency injunction, but last night, late last night, a big fat W for Infowars and a big fat L for The Onion, and that dude, Ben Collins, __ is his Twitter handle, X handle. I gotta stop dead naming Twitter, X, at @1_, and then I think there's 2 underscores at the end of the 1_. Ben Collins took to Twitter back at the end of November to say, we bought the assets, they're ours, we're gonna whatever. They made a joke out of it because that's what this was supposed to be. Stealing the assets and then running them into the ground and turning them into a parody of itself, something like The Onion, which would mean to desecrate the legacy of Infowars to turn it into the shithole that is The Onion, the unfunny shithole that is The Onion. Ben Collins, as of November, saying, no, it was legit, we bought it, etc., etc. Eat crow, suck a lemon, Ben Collins, The Onion. The judge said, no, we're annulling this. It doesn't look transparent. I don't know what went on. It wasn't legitimate. That wasn't the winningest offer. Annulled. The Onion, you don't have it. The only problem is the judge doesn't seem to have reprimanded the trustee, who I thoroughly believe engaged in bona fide chicanery, and I'm being polite. A lot of people hate lawyers, and a lot of you might not know this. I practiced for 13 plus years. I had a mild set of experience with bankruptcy law in Canada. It's federal jurisdiction, so even though I was only a Quebec civil attorney, I could also practice in federal laws, which included bankruptcy. You hate lawyers? Work with a trustee. They are slightly more scoundrelous than lawyers. If you think you hate lawyers, and you have good reason to hate lawyers, because as they say, 95% of the lawyers give the other 5% a bad name, work with trustees. They're not exactly the most above board people to work with, and the big acts of the trustee need to be ratified by the court in order to ensure that there's no fraud, because when you're dealing with trustees, they need to represent the interests of various parties in here. And sometimes what happens is the trustee gets co-opted by predominant interests, political interests, financial interests of the big creditors. And so massive acts like this by the trustee need to be approved by the judge in any event. And I predicted from the beginning there was no way the judge was going to approve this act of the trustee, because it reeked of fraud. The only problem is it doesn't seem that the judge went far enough to reprimand the trustee, Murray, who engaged in this. He says, I think the trustee is acting in good faith and I'm not going to reprimand him. So go back and do the offer again, according to the rules, transparently, etc., etc. I don't know if The Onion and its backers have been disqualified from any future bids, future offers on the assets, but it's been annulled. Infowars gets the big fat W. We will see who ends up buying these assets out of bankruptcy. But I made the prediction the judge was never going to approve this act from the trustee. I'm also making the bold prediction, however unlikely that it is, that these judgment creditors, these plaintiffs, who basically had a tens of millions of dollars by way of settlement over the course of years, turned down by their lawyers, who are politically motivated partisan intelligence hacks, are going to end up suing their lawyers for having basically screwed them out of millions and millions of dollars of settlement, assuming this does not all get turned over in appeal in the first place. I should say overturned, not turned over. I'm still thinking of my breakfast. So the bottom line, there will be complaints, my humble prediction, by these judgment creditors plaintiffs against their lawyers, potentially against the trustee, who are quite clearly acting against the interests of the people they're supposed to be representing and only carrying out political animus. And I also predict that this entire outrageous monetary award of $1.5 billion is going to get overturned in appeal. The whole process, many of you are asking, is currently under appeal. The only problem is that in Texas, you get to execute on a judgment notwithstanding appeal, and if it's overturned, you get the monies back with interest. But if it's overturned after you've stolen the assets and run Infowars into the ground, to the victor go the spoils. So that's where it's at. Big fat W for Alex Jones. Keep fighting the good fight, and the judgment creditors might want to think about what they're doing here, might want to look at their lawyers and say, what the hell are you doing here? Look at the trustee and say, what the hell are you doing here? Because above and beyond not representing your interests, this type of behavior is actually going to confirm a lot of the conspiracy theories that people had as relates to the motivation of these plaintiffs in the first place. So with that said, I got to go shoot an episode with the Unusual Suspects. If you like what I do, you know what to do. Like, share, subscribe. Make sure your notifications are turned on. Drop a comment in the comment section. Go to vivabarneslaw.locals.com. If you want to support the work that I do, you can go to Viva Frei and get some merch. But the easiest, freest way, like, share, snip, clip, exercise, most importantly. Eat healthy, sunlight, talk to people in real life, and now you know you vlog. Peace out. Booyah!